Oh.
Yeah, we got a question from Rhiannon.
Rhiannon. Hello, Rhiannon.
Says, has Candy ever had a student who hasn't responded to her approach? And if so, how did you deal with it?
That's an interesting question. I was talking about it over lunch when somebody said, what do you do if a student dominates your class? Well, it's actually a question of classroom management then. If the student doesn't want to do what the teacher deems to be, and I hate saying this, best, then they need to either go and find a teacher who will teach them the way they want to teach them, or trust that the teacher knows what they're doing, and most students do. I very seldom have had a student who says, I don't want to do it. Where's my book? Because I try to impress upon a student, and I think the most important thing for them is the time factor. Now, I'm not going to buy market leader for a student who's with me for 1 week. It's a waste of money. If he wants market leader, you can go and buy it from the shop or online and do it himself. He doesn't need me. He comes to me. What does he need from me? So I'm inclined to say to the student, you are here, you need me, I can help you, let me help you. Anita. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, this is Bob Merkel in London.
Oh, hiya, Bob, how are you?
See if I can read it. What about teaching soft skills such as negotiations, presentations? Do you prepare a negotiation role play and then let the dogme bark, as it were?
Again, Bob and anybody, there's no need to prepare negotiation role play. You just tell your students the topic for today is I negotiated with someone. They will then come up with a real experience, a relevant experience where they've had to negotiate, and you use that experience as your role play in the classroom. So Petra has told us today that she negotiated a pay rise with her boss. So, Fiona, you be Petra's boss, Petra, you be you, and let's have a look what you'd say to each other. You then extract the language and practice it the way
I'd say a couple of outing yes. Of what actually happens in good teaching. But I do think if you go to serious skills as in negotiation, there has to be some general competence level on the part of the teacher or the trainer. It's not as easy like you go in unprepared and let's do negotiating. It has to be a level of awareness, even though you use the Dogme approach. So actually, it requires an awful lot of the skill level of the teacher. To be a bloody good teacher to be able to do this, and you talk about that kind of skill. That's my suggestion.
I absolutely agree with you, because here we're moving into the field of are we teachers or are we soft skills trainers? I mean, if you're a soft skills trainer, are you a language teacher? We're both. We're facilitators, language facilitators, and educators. And I have to agree with you 100%. A number of times students have said to me, I have to negotiate with a Chinese company. And I'm like, oh my, what do I know about that? And very often I just throw it back at the student. I say, okay, what did you do? And they will teach me, and I will then give them the language that I hope is relevant and work like that. But I have to agree with you that we are moving more and more and more towards the trainer end of the, because competence is no longer just in the language, it's in everything. It's in cultural competence, it's in awareness training, it's in body language, it's in all those kind of things, and we have to keep abreast of that and aware of that.
One other is about being flexible, because I think probably seems to be part of another thing is you do have to now and then throw the rule book out the window, really. But I've found myself in situations I would probably have a Dogme style approach, and I find in a session that even if it's only for 20 minutes, go back into the traditional teaching role and show the students what they need can actually be very functional, effective, even if you have an approach like thoughts. So it's actually almost like, okay, have a consider that as well, and don't completely discard a more traditional approach. You might sometimes need it.
That I also agree with. I said during my talk, I talked hard teaching part of the lesson. A lot of our students, because they are adults, they are purpose-driven. They don't learn because that's their job. They learn because they have a purpose. And that's why it has to be needs-focused. What do they need? The lady about the exams. If they need to pass that exam, that's what you need to help them with. But if they need to be more effective negotiators, that's what we need. But there is a time and a place, and a very big place in the business English classroom for hard teaching, where you stand there and you tell them what to do, because that's what we need as adults. Oh, sorry, Petra, I'll come to you now.
A question from Dennis. Scroll up a little bit. All right, Dennis. Oh, someone's just moved me. Just a second. Right, would you say student-centered describes your approach as well as Dogme, or is it more than that?
I think that Dogme is student-centered. And to answer your question, my approach, student-centered, needs-focused approach, came before Dogme. Well, it didn't come before Dogme. It came before I was aware of Dogme. So when I was looking for some kind of verification of the way I was teaching, because it was completely alien to me to go into a classroom without notes and lesson plans and just, as some people say, wing it. It's not winging it. It's teaching on the tips of your toes, man. You really need to know what you're doing. And I found it very difficult to believe that what I was doing was right, was okay, was accepted and acceptable, and the best way of doing things. And that's when I found Dogme. So whether my teaching is student-centered and then dogmatic or the other way around, I would go with it student-centered, needs-focused, as business English generally is. And the Dogme came afterwards more as a justification for what I was doing. I came across it fortuitously, I have to say. But before that, I was teaching that way, but feeling quite uncomfortable about it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about emergent language. Students have different personalities. Sometimes you get people who are shy, who are not very confident in the second language, and it might be very difficult for you to actually get that emergent language from them to build an entire lesson. But have you ever had monosyllabic students or?
Yeah, but then that's when the conversation element of the lesson becomes important, because I'm standing here like a very traditional teacher talking to people who are lower down than I am, and I know better than you. What do they call it? The wise man on the clever bloke on the podium. No, I sit at a table. We all sit around a table, and it's this use of the personal that I find that the students are happy to share with each other something that for them is meaningful. Now, yes, we do get shy students, but I find that even after one day with that environment, that safe environment where they feel that they're listening to their colleagues making mistakes, and I don't say anything like that. I'm saying, oh, yeah, right. And they then start feeling to ask questions. That ever happened to you? How did you deal with it? And if they go no, say, all right, you're really lucky, because that must be really. Kind of bring them out. But again, if you just get resistance and resistance and resistance, I'm inclined then to just leave it until the next day or the next time or a bit later in the lesson, because you've got other students to work with, and if one is being resistant, I prefer not to focus too much on him. But I find it's not actually that common, I have to say, that they do talk.
The beauty of working with a class tries students often speak out when speaking out the grammar, checking exercise. Like
Yes.
that they then connect. They ask for their own opinion on something.
They kind of do draw back. Yeah, and I think there's also the question of, is that person naturally shy?
Yeah.
They may not only be shy in English, they just might not be very forthcoming anyway. But I think as my person propounded, the founder propounded, sense of smell. You can sense when somebody's just a shy person and doesn't really like it. And just leave it at that. Thanks, Petra.
Okay, one question from Alex in Barcelona.
Hello, Alex.
And Alex writes, Candy, could you point out some activities or procedures we could use to address and consolidate the language that may have emerged during a class?
Procedures, practices and procedures. I'm assuming, well, if you, I'm not plugging this book, okay, but it's written out in Teaching Unplugged. There are 10 or 12 strategies that you can use to practice the emergent language, and I've only given you 6. The ones I gave you were the retrieving of the faulty language, the recasting it in its correct form, repeating it. And repeat it by asking questions, and then it doesn't appear to be a parrot type drill, okay? Ask the question. You made a suggestion, didn't you? Yes, I made a suggestion. Who made a suggestion? Carl made a suggestion. Yeah, Carl made a suggestion. So, oh, did you make a suggestion? Yes, I made a suggestion. The student is answering rather than just repeating what you say. Repetition, obviously, researching is another strategy. You get the students, this is where they can work in groups. You can put them into a little group and say, what are the patterns in these sentences? And then get them to create their own. And all the strategies that I use are actually in the teaching now very beautifully. So if you would like to see what they are, you don't have to buy the book, I'll send them to you. Yes, Gavin.
What do you say to a learner who, like me, for example, who sometimes says,
if it's a private lesson, I say, okay, cool, we do it.
so you would abandon the dog?
Because as I say, that my student-centered needs-based approach came before I knew about Dogme. And because my students pay an enormous money to be there, I do what they want, unless they want to do something ridiculous.
So it's not a kind of principle.
It's not a.
Forgive that question, but
I'm not a dogmatic dogmatist.
Right.
No. Cornelia.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. Call again.
Well, I've got Halima in Uzbekistan.
Hello, Uzbekistan. Wow. It is Eurovision.
Right, but bear with me a moment. Student-centered teaching learning differs from, I think probably she means from country to country, maybe with learners from country to country.
I think that I actually can't comment because I've only ever taught in the UK, but I imagine that there might be some cultural issues here where a student feels that they are not able to be the focus of a lesson because they don't know enough. So they expect the teacher to stand up there and tell them what to do, which is fine. But when I say student focused, I mean that the students are participants in the lesson rather than passengers. So the Dogme approach would ask the student necessarily to participate in the conversation. And by participating in the conversation, the student becomes more active in the lesson, and by the teacher allowing them to take control of the lesson in that way, if that's what you want to call it, I feel that that is more student-centered than coursebook-centered or teacher-centered or grammar-centered.